Hey guys, so we've gone through basic patterns of inheritance. Now we're going to go through a little bit more complex patterns of inheritance in this video today. So, remember we went over first our Mendelian Principles. Mendelian Principles are generally ruled by a single gene, and we're going to have two alleles that we're talking about for the most part. Today we're going to talk about instances where there might be multiple alleles and how that works with inheritance. So keep in mind, the relationship between a gene and a trait is not necessarily simple. In fact, most of the traits that you recognize in your body are controlled by multiple genes, and there may be multiple reasons for why these are interacting with each other or presenting in the phenotypes as they do. So, three important types we're going to start with. Incomplete dominance, that's when we have a blending of traits, and we'll notice our pink flower here is an example of incomplete dominance. Our codominance, this is a hybrid with both traits. Frequently we'll talk about cows and their spots as an example of codominance. And multiple alleles, more than two allelic forms. So, blood types is a great example of when something has multiple alleles. It can also be an example for codominance too, but we will talk about that. All right, so incomplete dominance. Again, we notice we have the dark pink, we have the white, and then the offspring of this particular cross would provide us with a blending of these two traits. I want you to note that when we do write out incomplete dominance, you may see the notation for these types of alleles a little differently depending on the source or the textbook or the question that's being asked. So sometimes we will see big R and little r as in our traditional forms of regular laws of dominance. Sometimes we'll see two capital letters, and sometimes we may see notation as like an R1 and R2. So just be careful and keep an eye out for that when you're doing problems with incomplete dominance. Now in codominance, we are seeing the expression of both alleles at the same time in the phenotype. So for a very common example of this is roan cattle, where we have potentially a white and a tan cow crossing, and they're going to produce cattle with both tan and white spots. So we see in this particular form, we are writing with two capital letters, and that's pretty much always the case for codominance. We will see two different capital letters presenting themselves in our genotypes. All right, multiple alleles. An individual may only carry two alleles for a given gene, so you only have two copies of every gene, but in a population there may be any number of alleles for that gene. So for example, the ABO blood type gene is an example of a gene with multiple alleles. So our three alleles that we can have are big IA, big IB, or little I, and if you have whatever combination of that will determine your blood type. So, someone who is type A blood will have big IA, or big IA, little I. And that little I is going to be representative of the type O trait. And in order to have the type O trait, you need two copies of that because it is recessive. Now, I have a whole video on blood types if you want to get into this a little further and how those are inherited, so be sure to check that out.